In 1919, Russian inventor Alexander Andreev filed a patent for an oxygen and methane-powered device that straps to a person's back with 3-foot-long wings jutting out the sides. Though never built, Andreev's design is usually cited as the first real-life example of a jetpack. Science fiction had envisioned the concept a bit earlier, perhaps as far back as 1896, depending on how loosely you define jetpack. It would go on to be a fixture in pulp sci-fi from the late 1920s until today, and several superheroes have been created over the years using various styles of the device. During World War II, Germany, under the project codenamed Himmelstürmer, spent a lot of time and resources building their own version, which wasn't so much used to fly as to give soldiers a brief burst, allowing them to leap over obstacles like rivers and trenches. A few prototypes were developed, but only one supposedly survived the end of the war, though there is no publicly available information on what exactly happened to it. The fact that Nazis were tinkering with jetpacks just begs the question, though. What if they had gotten their hands on one that actually worked?
Stunt pilot Cliff Secord has just stumbled into something remarkable. A device that lets him soar through the air like a supersonic bird, unencumbered by the need for an aircraft. However, the jetpack is sought after by the US government, by its inventor Howard Hughes, and by a gang of mobsters in the employ of Hollywood movie star Neville Sinclair, who wants to give the device to the Germans so the Nazis can crush their enemies in Europe and end World War II. As Secord prepares to hand over the device to its proper owners, Sinclair kidnaps his girl, forcing him to go on the run in order to save her, under the guise of the Rocketeer.
It was 1981 when comics writer and artist Dave Stevens was tasked with creating a new character for Pacific Comics, a small outfit that was able to draw in remarkable talent like Jack Kirby due to not being restricted by the Comics Code. Stevens, a fan of art-deco Americana from the 1930s, came up with the idea for a hero called the Rocketeer, which was inspired by old Hollywood sci-fi serials, specifically Commando Cody. Stevens had always envisioned his comic as being highly adaptable for film, and in 1983, he sold the movie rights to director Steve Miner, who had a couple of Friday the 13th movies under his belt, and who was actively working on an American Godzilla movie that would never see the light of day. The film rights would eventually revert back to Stevens, though, who, in collaboration with director William Deere and writers Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo, were able to sell them to Disney in the late 1980s. Comic book movies weren't considered big business back then, but Disney, seeing potential value in merchandising, gave them a deal for a trilogy of films under their more adult-oriented Touchstone Pictures label. However, Jeffrey Katzenberg, chairman of Walt Disney at the time, decided to have all the more adult-oriented content cut from the story and produce it as something more family-friendly. Bilson and DeMeo wrote several treatments and scripts over the next few years as the film underwent multiple delays, which frustrated William Deere and caused him to quit the project. Enter visual effects man Joe Johnston, who had only recently begun his career as a film director with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Johnston was a fan of the comic, and upon learning that Disney held the film rights, he eagerly signed on. With Johnston on board and yet another rewrite in hand, Disney finally greenlit the project in early 1990. Hey, do you have a sci-fi classic you want me to cover? Drop it down in the comments below, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you'd like to support what I do even more, please consider joining my Patreon to get access to bonus content, vote on future topics, and more. If you still haven't gotten enough of me, I'm also the co-host of a couple of different podcasts, The Streaming Heap and From Here to Paternity, which are available wherever you get your podcasts, and I have a novel called Paradox that is available through Amazon. If all else fails, though, you can always check out my website at emcgill.com, where you'll find written reviews of plenty more science fiction classics in both film and literature. Now then, with all that shameless self-promotion out of the way, let's move on. 1 week before filming was originally set to start, they still didn't have a lead actor to play Cliff Secord, the titular Rocketeer. The studio wanted a younger version of actor Harrison Ford, with their favorite choice being Johnny Depp, but they also considered Matthew Broderick, Kevin Costner, Vincent D'Onofrio, Emilio Estevez, Don Johnson, Matthew Modine, Bill Paxton, Dennis Quaid, and Kurt Russell. Johnston and Stevens, however, opted for the television actor William Campbell, most well known as a recurring character on Dynasty, a regular on Crime Story, and a memorable guest star on Star Trek The Next Generation as the outrageous Okona.
Now, that's sex appeal.
Ironically, Campbell struggled with a fear of flying upon landing the part of the Rocketeer, but he worked with the film's aerial coordinator to find coping strategies during filming. For the female lead of Jenny, they considered Sherilyn Fenn, Diane Lane, Elizabeth McGovern, Penelope Ann Miller, and Kelly Preston, before settling on Jennifer Connelly, known at the time for Dario Argento's Phenomena, Jim Henson's Labyrinth, and John Hughes' Career Opportunities.
Yeah.
You are one good-looking ball of trouble.
She and William Campbell quickly began a romance behind the scenes, which helped sell their characters' chemistry in the film. She and Campbell would later get engaged, but broke it off in 1996. The main antagonist, Neville Sinclair, is played by James Bond himself, Timothy Dalton, who beat out both Charles Dance and Jeremy Irons for the part. Sinclair was written to be a not very subtle take on the real-life Errol Flynn, and Dalton's performance clearly leans into that. But even though it was a popular rumor at the time, and indeed still is to this day, that Errol Flynn was a Nazi spy during World War II, from what I've seen, there isn't actually any evidence for it aside from the increasingly implausible insinuations of a single biographer. His surviving relatives, those who knew him, and other Flynn biographers are nearly unanimous in their denunciations of the rumor, so much so that I feel the need to point it out and help set the record straight. That said, Dalton's performance is by far the most entertaining thing about the movie, because he is clearly enjoying the role of a mustache-twirling, rapier-wielding, Nazi-sympathizing playboy.
I do my own stunts.
Other actors worth noting are the recently passed Alan Arkin as Peavy, Terry O'Quinn as my favorite depiction of Howard Hughes, Tiny Ron Taylor as the Rondo Hatton-inspired Lothar, future Ferengi Max Grodenchik as Wilmer, John Polito as Otis, and Paul Sorvino as the mob boss Eddie Valentine. Dave Stevens himself cameos as the ill-fated German test pilot. On an eventual production budget of $40 million, filming began in the second half of 1990, mostly in the areas around Los Angeles and Bakersfield, California, with a large outdoor set built at a disused section of the Santa Maria Airport and Howard Hughes' airplane hangar repurposed from a hangar in San Pedro. Principal photography finished the following January, with a couple of days of shooting at Disney's MGM Studios in Central Florida. Filming did go much longer than expected, delayed by weather and other problems, but it reportedly never caused any friction with the studio. There was one serious accident on set where a pair of stuntmen crashed through a wall of balsa wood at too fast a speed, missing the landing pads and falling as much as 50 feet. Both stuntmen survived, one with minor injuries and another with head injuries that required an extended stay in the hospital. Many scripted action sequences didn't make it into the final cut of the film as well, including a scene set to take place at Grauman's Chinese Theater. Many of the Rocketeer's flying scenes were done with miniatures, and the Zeppelin, the Luxembourg, had an enormous 35-foot-long 1/24th scale model that took 65 man-hours to build and only a few minutes to obliterate with a series of internal bombs for the film's fiery finale. There was also a major dispute between the studio and director Joe Johnston over the design of the helmet, which Disney wanted to alter, but Johnston wanted to remain true to the comics.
How do I look?
Like a hood ornament.
Johnston only won in the end by threatening to quit if they changed it. The director of photography, Hiro Narita, used full-color advertisements of classic black and white films to inspire the look of his film, which he also achieved with the use of low-contrast film stock and a soft effects filter. This is why, Despite clearly being a movie made in the early 1990s, The Rocketeer still feels like a classic film, even if only on a subliminal level. The Rocketeer released in June of 1991 to decent if not glowing reviews, and a disappointing box office haul of $46.7 million. A little above the production budget, but nowhere near enough to cover Disney's extensive marketing campaign. Plans for a trilogy were scrapped, and the film was quickly sent to home video, where it made a respectable $23 million. 20 years later, Joe Johnston would direct the first Captain America movie, which has more than a few similarities to The Rocketeer. And The Rocketeer is still considered a cult classic, with memorabilia showing up at the convention circuit and talks of a sequel never far away. Disney developed a short-lived animated kids series based on the property that released in 2019, and as of now, there appears to be a new sequel in the works, with David Oyelowo both producing the film and taking the lead role of a former Tuskegee Airman who inherits the jetpack. As for me, I loved this movie as a teenager, and only recently rediscovered it as an adult. Now that I'm much more well-versed in classic Hollywood, I appreciate how far The Rocketeer goes in trying to recreate a romanticized form of the late 30s, not only in its setting but also in its intent. This is a movie designed from the ground up to tell a simple story that harkens back to the black and white ideals of America's coming emergence from the Great Depression and entrance into World War II. It is, of course, a heavily fantasized remix of certain historical events that, at its heart, is just a superhero movie, but that's what gives it its charm. It doesn't concern itself with moral gray areas or the preachier values of the more modern world, and that's kind of refreshing. It's the kind of movie that isn't ashamed to be what it is, and what it is just fun. Yeah, some of the effects haven't aged very well, and some of the tropes like the damsel in distress are more problematic to today's audiences, but The Rocketeer invites you to just sit back and enjoy the ride. There are no grand themes to explore, aside from the straightforward good and evil we can all get behind when Nazis are involved. Hell, even the mobsters turn against the Nazis in the end, because they may be criminals, but they're still American. I know I'm a few days late for July 4th, but this is the time of year, here in the United States at least, where we're supposed to be comfortable with that sort of thing. And a movie like this is only trying to make you happy. You can pick far worse movies for your Independence Day viewing. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What's your favorite pre-MCU comic book movie? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, here's another reminder to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when we'll talk about a sci-fi classic that goes much, much further back in time than the 1930s, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anybody.
Oh, my prince, would that you drink of my lips as deeply?
Cut!